So we're here to talk about Black Mirror season 7 on the horizon. Comes out next week on April 10th. And so, having seen the trailer, it seems clear that a couple of episodes are going to be referenced. We've got a sequel to USS Callister on the episode list. Another episode called Plaything seems to clearly be in the same universe as Bandersnatch, or, including some characters from it. We're seeing Will Poulter seems to be Colin, and so on and so forth. And then also, for some reason, I got thinking about Men Against Fire, and so I put that on our list to watch and discuss today as well. So we're going to talk about those three in some level of detail. And maybe some other stuff will sneak in from existing Black Mirror episodes, but we'll go basically in that order. So with USS Callister first, which we know we're getting a sequel to. Brief recap summary to remind you. I would encourage you potentially to go back and rewatch the episode as Ryan and I did this week, but here's your brief summary. In USS Callister, you've got Robert Daly, who's created the bubble version of the game. He's also made in the real world for the public called Infinity. He then inserted various coworkers into the game, copying their DNA somehow to create virtual versions of them. They seem like pretty perfect copies, at least in terms of their consciousness and so on. His purpose here seems basically to be to psychologically abuse them, assert his dominance. He's meek in real life, but in the game, he's like Captain Kirk, and it's sort of a Star Trek parody thing going on. At the end of the episode, the virtual copies manage to gain the upper hand. They escape the bubble through a wormhole, which is the game update. It's updating on Christmas Eve. Daly is trapped inside of the game and presumably dies in real life because he can't exit the game. He's got his door locked with a do not disturb sign on it, and they're on a 10-day vacation from work over Christmas and New Year's. So, and he doesn't have any friends, right? Like no one's going to find him.
Yeah.
It's definitely implied that he dead. Again, the episode is loosely based on Star Trek, has those vibes, but we have to wonder about what's going to happen with the sequel here, which is called USS Callister Infinity. It took a rewatch of the episode for me to be reminded that the game in the episode is called Infinity. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen there, how it will proceed, what's going to happen in terms of whether it will still be in line with the faux Star Trek space fleet kind of thing or not, what's the game like as a whole, and so on. So, okay, let's dig into this a bit more. What do you want to talk about here, Ryan? Where do you want to start?
Well, maybe just to sort of pull that thread that you were talking about there, that as we see USS Callister, we see this space fleet version of the game that he has built and built really only for himself, not for public consumption. And then at the end, after they go through the wormhole and Daly is taken out of it, it sort of becomes this thing they call like a stripped down mod of the game, where it's not a space fleet version, but as you put in your notes, we've not actually seen what the Infinity game looks like. We don't have any details about what that is, and this being called USS Callister into Infinity, I presume that we'll see these characters enter into whatever that new game is. We don't have any details about that.
No, right? We see them enter into it, at the end of USS Callister, right? Briefly. So I guess being in outer space in a spaceship is still a live possibility here. They run into, gamer guy 69 or whatever. That's not his handle. I don't remember what. I
Yeah,
didn't make a
that's what
note
it
of
was.
what his.
Gamer 691. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Voiced by Aaron Paul,
Yes.
which is great. And so it's clear that now you are in a big multiplayer interactive game universe. I'm really curious to see where they go here. Presumably, our friends on the USS Callister are the only ones who are digital AI copy people, and
Yeah.
everyone else is like a real. This is one of my questions that I was thinking about after rewatching the episode. This whole technology he's using with copying people from their DNA, that does not seem to be a part of the game normally, right? And I wonder about the technology more generally.
Yeah.
Do you think this is like a secret technology created, or do you think it's more widely available in the setting of the
It
episode?
seems to be a piece of technology that they have a common understanding of what it is when they discuss it amongst the crew that's there on the Callister, but that he procured one just for himself at his house, that he could somehow figure out a way to use this and manipulate it. Not that it's a normal part of gameplay or even a normal part of everyone's, everybody's got got one of these in their home and whatever this not too distant future is.
Right. They don't seem exactly surprised that he was able to do that,
Yeah,
but at the same time, there isn't much of an indication that it is a widespread thing. And I
right.
wonder how much they'll play with that when it comes to the sequel episode. Oh,
Yeah, and do we, yeah, are we encountering new people that we have their DNA, or there is some way that their DNA is used to help them enter into the game? I'm with you in that. I mean, he certainly is not listed on the guest list. That we think that Daly would have just expired there at his home after a couple weeks of no one checking on him and him just not being able to wake up from this game. But would you rule out the possibility that other people through their DNA or other means are able to enter into this simulation? I certainly can't rule that out.
yeah, and we should bear in mind too what's going on in the external world in the episode, right? Nanette, played by Kristen Milotti, blackmails herself, as it were, right? Like the fake or AI copy version of Nanette blackmails the flesh and blood Nanette in the real world to break into Daly's place and steal the lollipop and their DNA and stuff out of the fridge he has there and so on. So there's also that dynamic that I expect has to continue in some way between the versions of these characters out there in quote unquote the real world and the
Yeah.
versions that are in the game. And I wonder how that will play out. Including then another question I had here was with the AI version of Walton, Jimmy Simpson's character. Do you think he dies at the end when they go through the wormhole? The copy of him? Because it was said prior to that that they cannot die.
Yes.
So you definitely would have to read in between the lines an implication that now they can die, which I think might be there because they get their genitals back, for example.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I get the impression that no, that having not having a confirmation of this or having explicitly seen him die, we see him go through some sort of transformation or something as they go through the wormhole. But I didn't get the impression necessarily that we should definitively think that that version of him is dead, and so that therefore this version of Jimmy Simpson that's going to be in the show is some recreation or other refabrication of him through other DNA means. I think that we're going to find him back with the crew he always knew.
Yeah, but the thing is, I was paying close attention, or I rewound and I watched it a couple times. He's not there at the end. He's not on the bridge at the end.
Right.
The other people come back, who had been, I apologize, I didn't make a note of her name, but she'd been turned into the insect monster or
Yeah.
whatever. She comes back as a human being. And then the other guy from the office who'd been playing the villain, he comes back and he's now himself and not, Vartalk or whatever, right? But
Yes.
Walton, Jimmy Simpson's character, does not come back. He'd been, fixing the engine by climbing inside of it or whatever. So it was said that he would be functionally incinerated, but
Yeah.
not die because you can't die.
But did
So I
yeah,
guess I'm
did
wondering more broadly if now that they've exited the bubble universe, whether they can die because that
yeah.
raises the stakes. They thought they were going to die when they went
Okay,
through the
that's what I was
wormhole,
gonna say. That they
but
all
they
thought they were
didn't.
about to. Yeah. Yeah. They thinking they were all about to, including Jimmy Simpson's character, Walton, but none of them on the bridge did. So that leads me to believe that, well, then probably Walton didn't either. But they are now, in a sense, I guess, once they pass through that more, as you related very eloquently, they're more human now, much more human now, or much more real. So yes, that certainly is a possibility, I think, for this sequel.
Yeah, and if I haven't been clear, I'm wondering if he died because he was still his body was still in the engine on fire.
Mm,
So like
yeah.
if they became mortal at that point, then perhaps he was incinerated and died. And I think it's an interesting question to think about in terms of where this might go, because one would expect that, although the digital copies thought they were going to die and were fine with that, better death than, life in hell with an asshole god.
Right, right.
Now, presumably they'll want to live. They'll want to continue to exist, right? So are they in real potential peril though in this game? Because as opposed to normal users of the game, they don't have flesh and blood bodies back in the real world. So I
Yeah,
think there's a space where if they die in the game, they die at, full stop.
I think that there's, yeah, that's sort of a very logical plot to follow here. That's, whether it's the just natural conclusion of someone discovers, Daly's apartment, and there's a sense of, well, the people within the game he created for himself are in jeopardy because, they're going to dismantle this computer, whatever is going on, and they find that, they face some sort of existential threat of their existence will be eliminated because of the discovery of this game, the discovery of his apartment, whatever, and they're trying to fight against that and get themselves back into some, I guess, quote unquote, more real world, that is sort of their fight this time, because yes, they really are facing their mortality now.
I think so. And so Jimmy Simpson's character will be at least in the real world story.
Yep.
I'm just curious whether he'll be in the virtual part of the story. And this is, I guess, what I'm imagining for the sequel episode. That a big part of it would be then maybe this tension and this question, and continuing just to explore that question of the moral status of the digital copies.
Yeah.
Part of what stands out to me about this episode is how it really pumps the intuition that the digital copies are persons and have rights
Yes.
or should. You agree?
Which is why I put one very specific thing in our notes, that this sort of feels different. The show feels different when you consider it from a we just finished watching Severance perspective, while as these are actual, two versions of the same human. To what rights would a AI DNA copy of someone that exists only in a virtual world have, as opposed to the real world version of themselves? That there had to be some thing happen between one or the other. Well, certainly the real world people are going to say, yeah, eliminate that copy of myself, if it means my own safety and security. But yeah, what do they have? Do those within the game, do those that are AI DNA copies have certain rights? Yeah, it just sort of feels different now that we've had to consider that in a Severance world.
Yeah, it's an interesting connection. And we don't want to, hopefully people have been listening along with us and watching
Mhm.
Severance, but we should avoid big Severance spoilers here
Oh
today, I
yeah.
suppose. But it's also something Black Mirror has played with variously.
Hmm.
And part of what I think is interesting is sometimes it goes in a slightly different way, right? There are episodes where, oh, we've got a digital copy of a person and we're going to make him suffer for a really long time. And you might, as a viewer, almost be sitting there thinking, well, he deserves that, because of the terrible things that he did. I'm thinking of, I did the math at one point, and I think it's in White Christmas where the cops do something like this to the digital copy of the guy, and it plays with that question of, well, is that a person with rights? No, it's just a digital copy,
Right,
right?
right.
But by almost all criteria you could apply in terms of self-conscious awareness and things like this, you can make a pretty strong argument that it really is a being that ought to have rights. It's like if they can do Descartes cogito, right? If they actually go through, I think, therefore I am. But yeah, I know this one isn't on our list, but I love White Christmas and hopefully you've seen it. But if you do the math, it's like they end up using this time dilation thing, and they condemn this guy to like 10,000 years of listening to the same insipid Christmas
Oh
song or
boy.
something. So you have this is like that, or Black Museum is another one. But USS Callister is one that really narratively works in the other direction, very much puts us on the side of
Yeah,
these digital copies who are being abused, you know.
yeah, yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that.
Yeah, that is, I mean, certainly maybe the most featured in the trailer. We've heard the most about that. It's listed currently as the last episode in the series, but is what's probably widely known as one of their best episodes. I mean, they've said, yeah, this is going to be a feature of this seventh series.
Yeah. And I don't know what I think in general about the idea of making a sequel. I have my worries about that. I have my hesitations, but I think we've talked through how there is a lot of stuff they could work with here. And so I am looking forward to it. And the cast is great. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really saying something when you can take Jesse Plemons out of the cast list and still say, what a wonderful cast, you know?
Okay, let me ask you real quick before I know we have to move on. Do we see Aaron Paul in this episode?
Oh, I hope so. That'd be great.
Episode two. I mean,
Um,
I know he got an episode last season, but man, that would be great.
yeah, or like it would be great if they knew they were going to do this even, and when they had him in for season six, they just recorded some other stuff,
Right,
you know.
right.
So
Yeah,
I think it's a definite possibility that they could Easter egg that in one
yeah.
way or another. Uh, I
Well, maybe
don't think
as a way. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I don't think that Aaron Paul's character in USS Callister is the same as his character in
Oh,
what was it, Beyond the Sea?
Beyond the Sea. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, maybe as a way of segueing. So we know that this is since a direct sequel. We believe that Plaything has at least the bones or some sort of continuation of a story of Bandersnatch. Has Black Mirror done sequels before this season, or this the first two that we are aware of? I was trying to think and go through just the episode descriptors. I don't remember there being sequels before this season.
No, there really haven't been, although many of us have long played with the idea or question of whether all of the episodes are in the same world.
Yeah, yeah,
At least I've played with that, and I know other people have,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
Um, and I'm not aware of anyone really laying out that kind of argument, although I'm sure probably someone has somewhere
yeah,
on the internet tried to put things together and suggest this is the order. I've thought about trying to do something like that. I don't know if it would really fully work, but there certainly are at least resonances and ways in which, if you want to just think in a vague sense that everything's in the same world,
mhm.
you know. I mean, I guess Black Museum is the closest. Black Museum would be the closest because in that one there are explicit references to multiple other episodes.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you seen Black Museum, or do you recall Black
I don't
Museum?
think I've seen that one. I don't
I
think I've
don't
seen.
know that it's my favorite by any means, but it is like a museum, and inside the museum are exhibits having to do with heinous criminals and things like that. And so you get
Hmm.
within the museum references to various Black Mirror episodes.
I see.
So there is that. I don't know if I'd quite call it a sequel, but I will say further in what we're talking about, watching the trailer for season seven, a lot of it feels to be of a piece. I mean, the first trailer they released, they weren't making distinctions of what's from what episode, and
Hmm.
then they did release a second trailer where they do, but it still feels like thematically we're going to get a lot of stuff playing with digital copies, AI in the Black Mirror universe, video games, a lot of these themes that there are other reference points to throughout the run of the series as well. And it does really make me think or wonder to what extent the creators of Black Mirror are now thinking about this sort of thing in terms of like tying things together.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm curious
I
about that.
agree. And even to extend that to a more sort of analog example, I know the episode I'm going to write on called Eulogy is about the technology of being able to go inside a photograph and relive that moment. So yeah, just sort of this idea of how you can use this tech to enter into these types of worlds that are not possible now. Who knows what actually looks like, 5 years from now.
Yeah. That it would be a separate and distinct podcast episode, I think, to run through all of the things in Black Mirror that have real world correlates in
Oh
disturbing
my
ways.
gosh. Yeah.
There certainly are, multiple ones out there. But okay, let's talk about Bandersnatch a bit more.
Yeah,
You ready for that?
absolutely.
Okay, so with Bandersnatch, you'll recall this was Netflix's first attempt at an interactive TV episode. So it's kind of like a video game, choose your own adventure story. You've got to choose what Stefan's going to do, from eating cereal or what kind of cereal to how to dispose of his dead father's body. Anyway, so it's going to be kind of complicated to talk about, but the basic gist is that Stefan is trying to create a choose your own adventure video game based on a book, both of which are called Bandersnatch and don't exist in the real world, although Bandersnatch is a reference to Lewis Carroll, for whatever that's worth. And again, it seems like a couple of characters are going to be in an episode here of season 7 of Black Mirror. This raises the question of whether Black Mirror might be canonicalizing an ending of Bandersnatch, or it would at least seem to rule out some of the possibilities because the characters we're seeing in the trailer die in some of the possibilities. Um, so, then if you watched or played Bandersnatch and took the acid, which of course, why wouldn't you take the acid when you have the opportunity? You'll recall this rant of Colin talking about every possible reality existing. So they could just be playing with that in some way. Like maybe they won't resolve the question of canonical ending to Bandersnatch. Maybe they don't need to, but kind of a big question of how do these two episodes end up fitting together, um, and what the line is, what the connection will be, because it definitely seems like Will Poulter's playing the same character, and so on. So Bandersnatch.
Yeah. Uh, as you said, complicated to try to flush out and talk about in a complete way. I put in here a question. I don't think I've been through every possible permutation of the show. Do you think you have seen them all? I have read about every possible permutation, but I do not think I have visually watched every permutation of the show. I mean, even going back to, what record did I choose for him to buy when he was trying to, pick between the two, those types of things.
Yeah, I got pretty close.
Okay.
Of course, this was almost 7 years ago, right? It came out
Yeah.
in 2018. I cannot claim that I saw absolutely everything, in part because they were putting stuff out there like there are a trillion possibilities. Really, a trillion? I don't know about that. But I tried. I got pretty close. I went through an elaborate set of instructions back in 2018 in order to get the secret hidden ending of Stefan listening to Laurie Anderson on the bus. Not the one where he turns into a kid and dies with his mother. There's another one where the adult Stefan is on the bus and puts a tape into his Walkman and Oh Superman plays. Um, and that one in particular was like, in order to get there, you had to do ridiculous things. Like you had to keep saying no to the offer to make the video game 7 times or something. It
Oh,
was just like it was a ridiculous set of instructions, just like things that you would never decide to do, right? So I don't remember how to do that. One thing that was interesting, I wrote 2 articles on the episode back when it came out, and I went through it again this week. And so then I looked back at my articles, and the first one I wrote was just on my initial experience, right? This is
yeah.
what I did, here's how it went, and so on. And I thought it was funny how apparently the first time I watched it, I made completely different decisions than I did this week. And I didn't remember some of this stuff even,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I made a whole bunch of different decisions, and that was laid out. And then I wrote another article about it more generally, which doesn't try to lay out all the possibilities, but maybe it's a little bit more philosophical. So I think I got pretty close.
Hmm.
I've definitely seen all of the main endings. People count 5. there are definitely at least six because of the one I was just mentioning.
Yeah,
But
and there
that
are a
one's like
couple of early
secret.
endings where you can basically in the show way too early, and it prompts you to go ahead and try again.
Yeah, there's also a question of what counts as an ending, you
Yeah.
know. In my mind, it's only an ending when you get the credits.
Mm.
When Netflix is like, okay, here are the credits, and then maybe you can go back if you want to.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there are some things early on where I think if you go in, and a lot of people probably did this, and on the first pass they say, "Come make the game here. It'll be great." And you go, "Yes." Then the game's rushed. It's a flop. Right? Colin tells you made the wrong decision. Um, and that's more of a dead end because you almost have to.
Yeah.
I think you
That that
have to make another choice at that point.
that
You don't.
that gets you to the design by committee ending where everybody hates the game because everybody contributed to it and it was terrible, and then immediately prompts you to go back and say, "No, I want to design the game at home," basically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, but that hardly feels like an ending to me.
Right.
The ones that do all involve bad consequences for Stefan, generally being in prison or dying in one way or another. Um, and it's one of the things I find funny about Bandersnatch and was thinking about as I was going through it again this week is that as you get sucked into it, at least for me, it starts feeling like, okay, well, my real goal is for the game to be successful.
Yeah.
You know, what I mean? Like the goal is not for Stefan to have a good life.
Right.
That's clearly not possible, you know.
Consequences be damned. We just want that game to be
Um,
successful. Yeah.
so it's like, what's going to make the game a success? Burying dad or chopping up his body? The answer is chopping up his body, right? Yeah.
But then you're going to get it recalled and you're going to get to play it again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think that if there were one ending that I would think of as the ending, or like if they were going to sort of canonicalize an ending,
Yeah.
I think it would be the one where the game is successful, but then they found out he murdered his dad, so they pulled the game, and there's this cult thing, and then you jump to this woman named Pearl in our time ish, who's going
Yeah.
to remake the game. You know, that feels like the one that would they would choose as the ending. And I don't think that Colin necessarily dies in that one. Colin can die a couple different ways as you play through the game. Because if
If
you
you,
take acid with him,
yeah.
you're going to hit a point where either Stefan jumps off the balcony or Colin does. Colin poses this to you ultimately that this is only one of many realities. It doesn't matter. I'll prove it to you. One of us is going off the balcony,
Right.
and then he lets you choose, right? And so you can choose for Colin to go off. If
So I,
you,
I, I like this idea of Netflix taking one of the endings, presumably the one where Pearl picks up the path of this game or a new version of the game being designed, and we go down that road with perhaps Will Poulter's character as a mentor or boss of some kind. I'm curious what you thought about the sort of meta fourth wall breaking. Stefan is in the middle of a Netflix show ending. Did you ever get to that one? Did that one work for you or not?
the one where he's on set or
He's
whatever,
on a
where
set
things,
of
yeah,
of, Ne- of
yeah, yeah,
Netflix with Black Mirror. Yeah,
yeah. I know. I thought that was pretty good. I didn't love it. If I had to choose which ending I
yeah,
like the most or something. What I kind of appreciate more is the way in which Bandersnatch works to implicate you as a viewer. The stuff where Stefan starts saying someone's controlling me. Um have you gone through that path of it where potentially he's at his computer and he thinks someone's controlling him and you get options about whether to try to explain to him what Netflix is and
yes.
so
And
on. Have you
and
through
doesn't
that
that
one?
isn't that the one that ends with him in the therapist's office telling him that he's in telling the therapist that he's in a version of some sort of entertainment company's production of his of his life, and she says something to the effect of, no one would care about your life, and no one would film you or anything like that.
I think it can, but it doesn't have
Yeah,
to. It depends on what choices you make.
yeah, I guess
You
that's
know,
true. We
like
should really talk about does and should and could and all that. Is like so many
it's
options.
it's crazy. I mean, and I realized when you asked if I'd gone through all of the paths, one thing that I have to say where I think maybe not is, or maybe I don't remember because it was 2018, but when I was reading the first article I wrote on Bandersnatch, I noted that I got to a point where I'd gotten medication. Stefan had gotten medication from the doctor, and the two choices presented to me were throw them away or flush them. That there was no option to take the pills. When I was
Oh,
doing, when I was going through it just this past week, there was an option to take the pills. And now I'm thinking, oh well, I wish I'd taken the pills this time because I'm not sure if I've ever done that before.
I was gonna say when I reviewed it, my options were flush them or take them. And I don't know what I did before that led me to that, but those were my two
Yeah,
possible paths.
somehow the very first time I did it,
Yeah.
the choices were either flush them or throw them in the trash. There was no option to take them. And I've got a record of this. I wrote about it, right? But yeah, when I was doing it this week, the options were to either take them or flush them. You should not flush medication down the toilet, by the way. It's a very common trope in TV and film, but not good environmentally and potentially going to
Right.
contaminate the water supply. And so just to note that for people. But I don't know what else to say about Bandersnatch. My biggest
Yeah.
question is how it fits in the timeline because it doesn't seem like we're really getting an older version of Colin per se, right? So like are we
Yeah.
going to be in the 1980s
I
or
was gonna
maybe the
say, I mean,
1990s or
yeah,
what?
that's my assumption. I mean, I didn't pay incredibly close attention to wardrobe or that, but yeah, is this, is it 1990 now and they're, developing a new game, a different place, different time, but essentially in the course of the timeline, the same amount of time has passed. It's not like we've jumped 35 years into the future or something. So I'd be interested to see where that episode in particular is set.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it could possibly play in multiple timelines. This is also the episode with Peter Capaldi, apparently. And the way he looked in the trailer had me thinking for a moment that he might be playing Jerome Davies, the author of Bandersnatch, the book.
Oh,
But
okay.
he's credited as a guy with a name that's not that. So,
Okay, okay, okay. That would be
so
interesting. Sort of go back in time a little bit. That would be interesting.
but he kind of looks like him. You know, like
Yep.
as I was watching, I was like, he kind of looks like because there's one point in Bandersnatch where, well, there's potentially a point in Bandersnatch where Stefan is like watching a documentary about
Uh,
Jerome Davies. Um,
yeah. This may be the one I am most intrigued to see what it is about and how they do it and where it goes. We've had no indication that it is an interactive episode, but just curious what they do with this one.
yeah, and I don't think it will be. My feeling, at least, is that they've kind of given up on this experiment. Um, I know you put in our notes a question about this. Yes, I do think that Bandersnatch was the first one they did. I remember now that they did one with the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which I never
Hmm.
did, and
Yeah.
actually somehow, for some reason, I fell off in watching that show. I know I didn't finish it.
Yeah.
Too
No, I
long in
just
between seasons or something, and
yeah. Now the only one I could think of to make reference to was Kaleidoscope, which was not interactive. It was delivered to viewers in different orders, and that didn't matter what order you saw it in. And so that was just a sense of, there were 8 episodes all named a different color, and you could watch them in any order, but that wasn't an interactive experience.
yeah, it's a different kind of interesting idea. And I don't know if it felt like that worked very well either. I don't know if people want that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I think potentially we want the episodes in order. It's like
We
I
want
want to
them in
make my
order,
own sandwich
and we want them week to week so that we can talk about them. That's what we want.
and numbered, and all
Yeah,
of that. Yeah, indeed. But we'll see. It's possible. I
yeah,
did think going through Bandersnatch again this week. It was fun. I
yeah,
had a good time. So,
yeah. It was very fun to revisit it. Yeah.
anything else you want to say about Bandersnatch?
No, I'm good on that one.
All right, so then we're going to talk about Men Against Fire, which this is the most indirect connection. You know, going through the trailer, we had the idea that we were going to talk about some Black Mirror today. What episodes did the trailer make us think about? I have seen every episode of Black Mirror, and on TVObsessive.com, you can find articles written by me on everything through the first 5 seasons, including Bandersnatch, and then with season 6. Well, we split it up and let some other people get in there, and we're going to do that again with season 7. So I actually thought of a number of things, but didn't want to overload the podcast here, and really found myself thinking about Men Against Fire, perhaps also because of, I don't know, some things going on in the world right now and so on. It feels like a relevant episode. But okay, so to refresh your memories, in Men Against Fire, we follow Stripe, who's our main character. He's a soldier who has had an implant they call a mass put into his brain. Apparently, all the soldiers have a mass. It makes it so that the government or the military, whatever, can control his sense experience and dreams. And the primary goal here is to help him and others kill roaches, who we discover as the episode proceeds. Like, I don't know how far into it, because at first the roaches look like they're monsters, right? But we discover they're actually just human beings who have quote unquote bad DNA. So we're getting real eugenics vibes here, or real eugenics, the barrel of a rifle. Um, Thoughts about this one, Ryan?
Yeah, this was another one that we don't have to spend any more time on this, but just made me think of Severance, this idea of implanting something in their brains that makes them see something or feel something or think something that's not that's not there. I too noted, maybe almost with a little bit of grief, that the theme of xenophobia in this episode in particular has and the time, perhaps this came out in October of 2016, just as how it's almost in a way was sort of a soothsayer of sort of how things would be going in a lot of places in our world since then. And it's I think that I don't remember seeing this episode since it, came out, back
Yeah.
whatever that was, 7, 8 years ago. But I found it affecting me more in this idea of we feel so strongly about this being the right thing to do that we will do anything, including manipulate what you see, feel, hear, think, smell, to make sure that you do it the way that we want. I don't know, just feel, I guess in a lot of ways, many of these episodes do, but it just feels different here in 2025 than maybe it did 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah. I've always felt this is a powerful episode. It's one thing that is disturbing when you start thinking it through is that, well, in the real world, you actually don't necessarily even need the augmented reality in order to get people to,
Yeah,
carry out genocide and things like this,
yeah, that's
Um, but the idea of employing technology to make it easier, and the way that it then plays on some questions about autonomy and so on, right? Because we ultimately see Stripe, we see a video of him in the past freely agreeing to have the mask put in and so on. Um, to what extent is that a free choice is one thing I always think about here. And then, it's really a forced choice when it comes down to it in the situation he finds himself in, where
yeah.
the muckety muck guy basically ends up saying, well, either you can let us reset your mass and wipe your memory, or we'll just have you relive the experience of murdering people over and over and over again. Like that's pretty forced choice. But
Yeah. Michael Kelly, who's always good in everything he does, he plays the therapist, I guess, for lack of a better term, who controls what he's seeing in his brain.
yeah, the same guy who was in House of Cards as
Yeah.
Doug Stampler or whatever his name was. Yeah. Um, Always a good actor, perfect for this kind of role.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
they had good cast in this episode too. Sarah Snook's in this episode.
Yeah, I was going to say for
Um,
Succession heads who want an early Sarah Snook, she's in there for a good portion of the episode.
Yeah, yeah. And what's her name? Madeline Brewer. I think I have it
Alan Brewer's
right.
there. Yeah.
Some recognizable faces. Anyway, that's not the point. I guess, part of why I thought about this episode after watching the season 7 trailer is it seems like we're going to get a lot of stuff playing with video games and an intersection between that and violence, and I'm assuming maybe probably real world violence. So I thought about how in Men Against Fire, this is kind of what they're doing, right? That it's much easier to ruthlessly kill a person when that person presents is presented to you, like you see them as like a hideous vampiric kind of monster thing,
Yeah.
and you hear their voice as shrieky clicky noises or whatever, and so to digitally enact this kind of othering of the other visually, and you can't smell, and it is kind of making the reality for the soldiers much more like a video game where you're running into the building and you see the roaches and you go
Yeah.
right, and you're like, yeah, we won the video game. So that's part of why I was thinking about it here.
Yeah, I think there's a clear connection to that. I think there's a clear connection, as this is a bleak sort of futuristic look at how technology could be used. Certainly, two main things that draw on, historic events from the past. Michael Kelly has this very interesting, powerful monologue about, soldiers who won't do things and how can we encourage or motivate or influence them to do the things we want them to do, which is to kill our enemy, right, more effectively, more efficiently. Talks about that. And then certainly this whole idea of people who have less inferior DNA, whose eugenics are not as superior to quote unquote ours. I mean, plenty of, obviously going back 100 years, examples of, even longer than that, examples of whether it's autocrats or whatever trying to wipe out certain populations, and thinking about this idea of what we like. Oh, what would it take? Our society, our country would never get to the point where we would be able to think about that type of that type of action toward a certain type of people. But if it gets to the point where certain people want to do that, and then can begin finding the right ways to manipulate, influence, and impact how you do it without you being aware of it, where
Yeah, and
where
I mean,
where do you draw the line, basically?
well, I think Men Against Fire too, part of why it stands out to me as a great episode of Black Mirror is the way in which I think it kind of implicates us as viewers, or I don't know if I should speak for everyone or just for myself, but thinking about it in terms of watching the episode, at first we're told there are these roaches that need to be exterminated. We're calling them roaches. You also have the villagers who are really scared of them, who say that because roaches got into their food, now they're gonna have to throw all the food away because it's contaminated. And um, you might even as we're finding out that they are human beings, and but you have this line about them being, you know, um, like infected, contaminated, or they have bad DNA or whatever. And at first, I at least think there's some space in there where, as a viewer, you might be thinking, well, like, are they infected with some kind of plague that needs to be eradicated or something like that? And then ultimately we discover no, it's
Yeah.
just like they've got a higher chance of cancer, and he says something about sexual deviancy or something, right? It's like that ultimately um it's not like they've got some medical sickness where they would need to be quarantined or something like that. No, it is just a straightforward kind of program of eugenics. But the episode shows us how much people can get on board with that, and how easily, like, maybe the villagers aren't actually killing roaches themselves, but they want them to be killed even though they see them as just
It's just
you you
humans.
know as
Yeah.
just human.
I
uh,
always think about um one of my guilty pleasure movies is Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, where the main theme of this movie is, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And is that right or is that wrong? And I thought about that in the context of this episode, where, as you said, okay, if this was, people infected with something where it was going to impact the greater population, okay, it seems like a more gray moral choice of what you do there. However, this is not it at all. This is a potential just based on where they grew up or how they grew up or who their parents were, that they could be something, and they're choosing to cross that line definitively anyways. Yeah, so it's quite the struggle to watch.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if anything, it should make us think in the other direction and really double down. I mean, what do I want to say here? I'm trying to say that, yeah, no, there is no justification for doing anything like this on the basis of,
Right.
Bad genetics or whatever, that we are dealing with human beings with rights, and it's not ever justifiable to um just like round up and kill people because they have bad genes or whatever, right? That's part of why I mentioned quarantine, because ultimately that's what I want to say. If it were some super contagious infection or something, okay, maybe we'd have to think about quarantining people.
Exactly.
Um, but I don't know. The point is, in the context of this episode, it's really nothing like that. Ultimately, it really
No.
is just uh
I did go back and obviously if you look at the Wikipedia page for this episode, it links to a lot of reviews of the episode. At the time, it
yeah,
was really panned. This episode was people saying that the twist was too predictable, that that just some of the logic didn't make sense. I wonder if this came out next Thursday for the first time, if it would be received differently or more of a, oh, this is hitting different nails on different, with on the head a little bit more. I'd be curious to know what the 2025 reaction would be to this.
yeah, that would be interesting. Um, I mean, I always liked it personally, so I
Yeah.
don't know. Liked it, you know.
Yeah.
It's always made me feel bad about myself in an interesting way, you know.
Full circle
Um,
to that mood that Black Mirror makes you feel. Yes, I understand.
yeah, bad about myself, bad about being human, just um to put a bow on this somewhat, I'm wondering, or almost expecting based on the trailer, maybe some intersection between some of these themes, going back to USS Callister, talking about the digital copies, um, and the question of their moral status and do they have rights and so on and so forth. And the running theme of video games will seem to be at play in more than one episode probably. So is that something that's going to come together, right? Where say you have a video game where you actually have digital copies of real people that you are killing in the game.
Yeah.
Um, Something like that, right?
Yeah. No,
I
I
mean,
I think that I don't recall there being a through line in season six. There were some very experimental things. I remember the one I wrote about Demon 79, but it seemed like there might be more of a, we had this conversation a few weeks ago. We couldn't even tell from the initial teaser if this was all one long episode or if it was from various components. So yeah, how are they connecting these things? I think will be one of the interesting micro things to follow.
yeah, it definitely from the trailers feels more like Black Mirror to me than
Mhm.
season six did. So hopefully that is the case when it comes to the actual episodes,
Yeah.
because that was my big criticism with season six, was it just didn't really feel like Black Mirror sufficiently, um, because it wasn't doing what Black Mirror generally does, which is, I think, I've always interpreted the title
Yeah.
as hitting two things at once, right? Like on the one hand, the Black Mirror is like the black screen of your smartphone. But on the other hand, it's a mirror that shows us the blackness or darkness within the human soul,
Yeah.
or something like
Exactly.
this. And
Exactly.
in a lot of ways, I felt like season six didn't quite do that. A
Yeah.
couple of the episodes weren't really even about technology, and so on. But
Yeah.
really hopeful for season seven.
Yeah, same here. Looking forward to digging into it with you next week.
All right. So that's the plan. We're going to go through season seven of Black Mirror episode by episode, week to week. Of course, it's going to drop all at once. So hopefully, people will stick with us as we work through analyzing each episode. We will also have articles on each episode on tvobsessive.com, written by me, written by Ryan, written by a couple other people. And so hopefully in that tag team approach, we should have those out relatively quickly after the season comes out on April 10th. Join us for the podcast each week as we work through the season. Our plan is to go in the order that they are on Netflix, and the current indications suggest that Common People will be season 7, episode 1. So that's the plan. If that ends up not being the case, we'll probably switch gears and take them in the order in which they're presented. So hopefully you'll join us for that. Thanks as always for listening. Hopefully you've enjoyed the podcast. If so, please do leave a good rating, review, all that good stuff. If you're on YouTube, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate it. You can follow TV Obsessive on social media, search for TV Obsessive. And again, go to tvobsessive.com, poke around. If you're interested in Black Mirror, there is an article on every episode of Black Mirror on tvobsessive.com. And a little more than that also, for example, a more general article I wrote about season 6 and 2 articles about Bandersnatch. And anyway, go check it out. And we'll be back next week.
All right. Looking forward to that. We will see you next time.